At 35, life doesn't fall apart loudly. It settles into a quiet weight you carry without realizing when you picked it up. You wake up one morning and nothing is technically wrong. You have a routine, you have responsibilities, you might even have things you once wanted, and yet there's a low, steady pressure in your chest that doesn't go away. Not panic, not sadness exactly, just something unfinished, something unnamed. 35 is strange because it sits between confidence and doubt. You're no longer guessing who you are, but you're not fully sure you've become the right version of yourself either. The excitement of everything is possible has faded, but the clarity of this is enough hasn't arrived. You exist in between. You notice it in small moments, standing in the shower longer than usual, sitting in your car after parking, engine off, phone still in your hand, staring at emails without opening them right away. These pauses weren't planned, they just started happening. At 35, people stop asking what you want to be and start assuming you already are it. The questions change, they become quieter, more practical. Is this working? Is this sustainable? Is this all there is? And those questions don't come from others anymore, they come from inside. You remember being younger and believing that by this age, things would feel settled, not perfect, but aligned. You thought confidence would replace uncertainty, that experience would bring peace, that effort would eventually turn into ease. But instead, you feel tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Your body still works, but it doesn't bounce back the same way. Your energy has edges now. You choose where to spend it because there isn't enough for everything. Late nights cost more, recovery takes longer, and there's a subtle awareness that time is no longer stretching endlessly forward. It's moving, quietly, steadily. Career-wise, 35 can feel like standing on a plateau you worked hard to reach, only to realize the view isn't what you imagined. Maybe you're doing well on paper, or maybe you're still pushing. Either way, there's pressure. Not the hungry pressure of your 20s, but a heavier one. The pressure of responsibility, of expectations, of knowing that changing direction now carries consequences. You think about the paths you didn't take, not dramatically, just casually, like background noise. Different cities, different relationships, different risks you talked yourself out of. You wonder briefly who you would be if you had said yes one more time, or no sooner. Relationships feel different too. Friendships are thinner, not weaker, just stretched by distance, schedules, and life stages that no longer align. You don't drift apart because of conflict. You drift because coordinating becomes exhausting, because everyone is carrying their own invisible load. Romantic relationships, if you're in one, feel less about excitement and more about maintenance, communication, compromise, the quiet work of staying connected while both of you change. If you're not in one, the absence feels heavier than it did before. Not desperate, just noticeable, like an empty chair you don't talk about. At 35, comparison sneaks up differently. It's not about envy, it's about timing. Someone else is ahead, someone else is starting over, someone else seems content. You scroll past lives that look full and wonder why yours feels so busy yet slightly hollow. You ask yourself questions you didn't used to ask. Am I actually happy or just functioning well? There's also guilt mixed into it because you know you're fortunate in many ways. You've survived things, you've built something, you're not lost in the way you once were. So why does it still feel unsettled? That guilt keeps you quiet. It convinces you that you shouldn't complain, that this is just adulthood, that everyone feels this way and no one talks about it. So you keep going. You do what needs to be done. You show up. But inside, there's a subtle friction, a sense that you're moving through days on momentum rather than intention. You notice how often you say, "I don't have time," when what you really mean is, "I don't have space." Space to think, to reflect, to ask bigger questions without needing immediate answers. At 35, you begin to realize that avoiding those questions doesn't make them disappear. It just makes them louder later. There's also a quiet fear that creeps in. Not fear of failure, but fear of stagnation.
of waking up at 45 and realizing nothing truly changed because you were too busy surviving to choose. You don't talk about that fear openly. It doesn't sound dramatic enough to deserve attention, but it sits there, influencing decisions, making you restless on calm days, making silence uncomfortable. And yet, despite all of this, there's also something else present at 35. Something subtle but important. A growing awareness. You start noticing patterns in yourself, in your reactions, in the types of problems that keep repeating. You realize that some of your stress isn't coming from what's happening, but how you respond to it, from the standards you hold yourself to, from the roles you've accepted without revisiting whether they still fit. You start to see that being busy has become a way of avoiding feeling, that productivity can sometimes mask uncertainty, that staying occupied feels safer than slowing down. There are moments when you catch yourself missing versions of you that no longer exist. The optimistic one, the reckless one, the one who didn't calculate every move. You don't necessarily want to go back, you just wish you could borrow some of that lightness again. At 35, you carry stories you don't tell anymore, not because they're secrets, but because explaining them feels exhausting. You've learned that not everyone needs access to every part of you. You've also learned that strength doesn't always look like pushing forward. Sometimes it looks like admitting you're unsure, but you're not quite comfortable with that yet. So you stand here, capable, experienced, tired, a little confused, a little hopeful, holding questions that don't demand immediate answers, but won't let you fully relax either. This is the age where nothing collapses, but nothing fully resolves, where life asks you not to rush, but also not to sleepwalk, where the noise fades just enough for you to hear yourself thinking again. And maybe that's the most honest thing about 35. It's not a crisis, it's an invitation. An invitation you're not sure how to respond to yet, but you feel it, and you know this is only the beginning.
By 35, you stop waiting for life to slow down on its own. You begin to notice that it won't. The days keep moving at the same pace, whether you feel ready or not. Responsibilities don't pause just because you're tired. People don't lower their expectations because you're questioning things quietly in your head. Life keeps asking you to show up, even while you're trying to figure out why you're showing up this way. At first, you try to fix the feeling the way you fixed other problems before. You optimize, you reorganize. You tell yourself you just need better habits, clearer goals, more discipline. You read articles, you listen to podcasts. You promise yourself that next month will feel different. Sometimes it helps, briefly. But the feeling doesn't fully leave, it just shifts, it waits. You start noticing how often your mind goes into default mode, how quickly you react instead of choosing, how easily you say yes to things you don't want simply because saying no feels complicated. You've gotten good at being reliable, so good that people rarely question whether you're okay with it. At 35, you're trusted, and that trust can quietly trap you. You realize how many roles you're playing without consciously deciding to keep them. The responsible one, the steady one, the one who doesn't rock the boat, the one who handles things. These roles once felt like progress, proof that you grew up, proof that you were capable. Now they feel heavy. You begin to see how much of your energy goes into maintaining an image of stability, how often you downplay confusion so you don't seem ungrateful, how often you ignore exhaustion because this is just how it is. Mistakes at this age feel different, too. In your 20s, mistakes felt educational. At 35, they feel expensive, emotionally, financially, socially. You hesitate more. You replay decisions longer. You question whether you're allowed to experiment anymore. And yet, you also start recognizing patterns in the mistakes you keep repeating, the same type of burnout, the same kind of conflict, the same avoidance. It becomes harder to blame circumstances when the outcomes look familiar.
Relationships begin to reveal their real shape, not the version you hoped for, but the version that exists when time has tested it. Some connections deepen quietly, others fade without drama. A few stay but feel different, less flexible, more defined. You notice how much energy it takes to maintain certain relationships, not because the people are bad, but because you've both grown in directions that don't fully align anymore. Conversations feel shorter, laughter requires more effort. You still care, but something has shifted. There's grief in that, even when no one did anything wrong. At 35, you start understanding that not everything that ends is a failure. Some things simply complete their purpose, but knowing that doesn't make letting go easier. You also begin to confront how much of your identity is tied to what you produce, how useful you are, how dependable, how needed. When you slow down, even briefly, there's an uncomfortable question underneath it. Who am I if I stop performing? You don't ask that out loud. It feels too big, too vague, too dangerous. Instead, you keep going. But life has a way of creating pauses you didn't plan for. A quiet weekend, a canceled meeting, a long drive alone, a sleepless night. In those moments, the noise drops just enough for clarity to sneak in. You begin to see that a lot of your exhaustion isn't coming from effort, it's coming from resistance, from pushing through things that no longer fit, from carrying expectations you never agreed to consciously. You start noticing small internal shifts. You don't react as quickly anymore. You sit with discomfort a little longer. You question advice that once sounded convincing. You stop chasing every opportunity just because it's available. This isn't confidence yet. It's fatigue mixed with awareness. There are days when you feel disconnected from your own life, like you're watching it rather than living it. And instead of panicking, you simply notice it. That's new. Younger you would have rushed to fix the feeling. Now you're starting to observe it. You also notice how much quieter your desires have become. Not weaker, just quieter. They don't shout. They don't demand immediate action. They wait patiently for honesty. You realize that some of your unhappiness comes from trying to live a life that made sense to an earlier version of you, a version with different values, different fears, different priorities. That version did the best they could, but they're not the one living your life now. At 35, the question shifts from what should I do to what am I willing to continue? It's a subtler question, but heavier, because continuing is a choice, even when it doesn't feel like one. You begin to understand that time isn't just passing, it's revealing. It reveals what you tolerate, what you avoid, what you keep postponing because facing it would require change. You don't suddenly become brave. You don't burn things down. You don't reinvent yourself overnight. That's not how this age works. Instead, you start making quieter adjustments. You protect your energy a little more. You let some expectations drop. You stop explaining yourself as much. You allow some things to remain unresolved. You accept that clarity doesn't arrive fully formed. It comes in fragments, in realizations that don't feel profound at first, but linger. You notice that when you stop forcing happiness, you feel calmer. When you stop chasing certainty, you feel lighter. When you stop trying to optimize every part of your life, you breathe more easily. There's still confusion, still pressure, still moments when you wonder if you're falling behind. But now, there's also a growing sense that not everything needs to be solved right now. You begin to trust yourself differently, not because you have answers, but because you've survived enough questions to know you'll find your way through the next ones too. At 35, the shift doesn't announce itself. It unfolds quietly. You don't wake up transformed. You wake up slightly more honest. And that honesty, even when it's uncomfortable, starts changing the way you move through your life. Not loudly, not dramatically, but steadily. And something tells you that this is leading somewhere important, even if you can't see it clearly yet. By the time you reach 35, you begin to understand that clarity doesn't arrive as a moment. It settles in slowly, the way evening light fills a room without asking for attention. There isn't a breakthrough, no final decision that suddenly organizes your life into something clean and obvious. What changes is quieter than that. You stop fighting certain truths. You stop needing everything to make sense right away. You realize that much of the pressure you carried wasn't coming from life itself, but from the idea that you were supposed to feel further along by now, that you should be more certain, more satisfied, more defined. And slowly, you let that idea go. At 35, acceptance doesn't mean settling. It means seeing things clearly, without demanding they be different before you allow yourself peace. You begin to understand that discomfort isn't always a signal to escape. Sometimes it's simply information. You stop interpreting uncertainty as failure. You see it instead as a natural part of growth that didn't end with youth. The belief that confusion should disappear with age turns out to be untrue. It just changes shape. There's a quiet relief in realizing that you don't have to resolve your entire future to live your present honestly. You start paying attention to what actually sustains you, not what impresses others or looks stable from the outside. You notice which conversations leave you calm instead of drained, which routines ground you instead of trapping you, which ambitions feel alive rather than heavy. You also notice what no longer deserves your energy, not because it's wrong, but because it asks too much from you now. You allow yourself to step back without needing a dramatic reason. At 35, you learn that saying no doesn't always require explanation, that boundaries don't have to be sharp to be effective, that protecting your attention is an act of responsibility, not selfishness. You become more patient with yourself, not indulgent, patient. You understand that growth at this stage looks less like expansion and more like refinement. You're not adding as much anymore, you're removing. You remove expectations that never belonged to you. You remove urgency where there is no real emergency. You remove the need to be everything to everyone. And in doing so, you create space. You begin to feel your life again, not as a checklist, but as a sequence of moments. You notice light through windows, silence in the early morning, the steady comfort of familiar places. These things were always there, but you were too busy measuring yourself to feel them. At 35, you accept that some dreams will remain unfulfilled, not because you failed, but because you chose differently. And you stop seeing that as loss. You see it as evidence of discernment. You realize that identity isn't something you arrive at and lock in. It's something you negotiate with life over time. The pressure to define yourself completely starts to fade. You don't need a perfect narrative anymore. You don't need your life to sound impressive when explained. You just need it to feel honest when you're alone with it. There's a new kind of strength that emerges now, not the strength to push harder, but the strength to pause, to listen, to trust your internal signals, even when they don't align with external expectations. You stop waiting for permission to live in a way that feels sustainable. You understand that no one else can grant that. It's a choice you make quietly, repeatedly. At 35, you learn that peace isn't found in answers, but in alignment, in small, consistent decisions that respect your limits, in relationships that allow you to show up as you are, not as you're supposed to be. You also accept that life will continue to change you, that this clarity too will evolve, and instead of fearing that, you welcome it. You've learned that resisting change costs more than adapting to it. You stop asking when things will finally feel complete. You start appreciating that completeness isn't a permanent state. It's something you experience in moments, and that's enough. This age teaches you that fulfillment doesn't come from intensity. It comes from coherence, from your actions matching your values often enough to create a sense of trust within yourself. And maybe that's the real lesson of 35. Not that you've figured everything out, but that you no longer need to. You move forward with quieter confidence, with fewer expectations and more presence, with an understanding that your life doesn't need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. It just needs to be yours. And that realization doesn't change your life overnight. It changes how you live it. Calmly, intentionally, one honest moment at a time.